want to thank you for coming out tonight for our virtual movie discussion. Before we get started, I would like to thank the Wisconsin Veterans Museums Foundation for their continued support. Thank you to Miss Jennifer Carlson. And of course, I also like to thank Generac Power Systems for being a sponsor for the museum and for our virtual programming. We are definitely happy to have both of those entities on board and supporting us for all of our virtual programming. Speaking of virtual programming real quick, all the events for the rest of the year are on our website, and I'm already working diligently on 2022. So we're not going to stop with our virtual programming. It's already included in the 2022 mix. So movie nights are going to keep going just like usual. And I got a great slate of movies, at least I think I do, for next year. I tried to pick some, maybe that's not lesser known movies, I won't say that, but maybe just some movies that really aren't thought of as often as not when you think of war movies or military movies. And I did take suggestions. Lisa, I believe you sent a suggestion in, and Chris as well. Those are on my list for next year, so look forward to those. But tonight, we're going to be looking at the movie Zero Dark 30 from 2012. Produced and directed, one of the producers anyway, by Catherine Bigelow. And you should remember her work from Point Break, K-19, The Widowmaker, and Hurt Locker, which won an Academy Award along with the screenplay, or the gentleman who wrote the screenplay for Zero Dark 30. He also wrote the screenplay for The Hurt Locker, which was also directed, by Catherine Bigelow. And that won Oscars in 2009. But we're not talking about The Hurt Locker, we're talking about Zero Dark 30. Cinematographer for this film was Greg Fraser. He also worked on Rogue One, the Star Wars story, the upcoming Dune movie, which I am eagerly waiting. I cannot wait to see that. And also a few episodes of The Mandalorian as well. This film stars Jessica Chastain as Maya, Jason Clarke as Dan, Kyle Chandler, James Gandolfini, Chris Pratt, among others. And it was nominated for 5 Oscars to include Best Actress in a Main Role, Best Picture, Best Screenplay, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound Editing. It did win the Oscar for Best Sound Editing, and Jessica Chastain did win a Screen Actors Guild Award for Best Actress, but she did not win the Oscar. And this film did not pick up the Best Picture Oscar for 2012, but the Oscars would have been in 2000. Is filmed location primarily in India. One scene, the ship that served as the black site, that was filmed in Poland, in Gdansk. And then also all the Islamabad scenes were filmed in Amman, Jordan. Filming went from the March 5th of 2012 to June 2nd of 2012. It was produced by Columbia Pictures, distributed by Sony Entertainment, and it was released here in the States nationally on December 19th of 2012. It had a budget of around $40 to $50 million, and the total box office receipts were $139 million. So that was a good moneymaker for Columbia Pictures and for Sony distributors as well. And I just want to get everybody's initial impression on what you thought of the film.
I liked it. I thought because it mainly because it didn't get like sappy or weird or like, I felt like it followed the story extremely well that it was based on. And oddly enough, coincidentally, I was wanting to read Killing Pablo by Mark Bowden, and I didn't know that he wrote a book about this. So I had ordered it and I was reading it when you sent the thing out to do this movie. So and that was good to get like an actual factual refresher right before watching the movie again. And it really, I thought it went, well.
Excellent. Anybody else have any thoughts on what they thought of the film? John, Karen?
I think I was a little interested that there was the depth of what had to go into finding Bin Laden. What we saw on TV and in news broadcasts, it seemed like it was a 1, 2, 3 thing quickly, and here it spanned I was surprised by the
years.
amount of time that it took.
Yeah, I mean, this movie basically synthesizes a whole decade worth of work into about 2.5 hours. And it doesn't really portray itself as being a 10-year hunt, but it really was. Lisa, did you have thoughts on initial thoughts on the movie?
I don't like it weird, but I think I'm probably a little bit more like the emotional, sappy kind of movie. So that part of it, it wasn't a great movie for me, but I thought the factual or the part that they unwrapped the information, and I appreciated that.
And how about you, Chris?
I liked it. I particularly liked the arc of the way she had to fight throughout the whole movie to get what she wanted. It was a really, I thought in some ways it was a good movie about bureaucracy.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit. I believe it was with The Longest Day, and we talked a little bit about the bureaucratic hero as opposed to the action hero, and that's kind of what we get from this film. We see a lot of Maya. We see a lot of Maya sitting behind her desk looking at computer screens. I read a couple film reviews about how impressed they were with Jessica Chastain and being able to. I have to go back and take a look at it again after reading these reviews, but one in particular said that she basically gave a different look, a different facial expression every time we saw her looking at a computer screen, and they really gave her credit for that because it's hard to, it's hard to change your face every single time you're doing a certain thing, and for her to give so many different looks just by reading information on a computer screen. Like I said, I have to go back and take a look and see how accurate they were in that assessment. But yeah, we're looking at the bureaucratic hero here. We see some action heroes, especially toward the end, the last half hour or so. But it's mostly Maya, and it's mostly her just trying to decipher the little clues and the little tips that she's getting. Personally, I like the film. There's a lot of inaccuracy that we'll talk about as we go through it, not only with regards to the actual events themselves, but also just from a filmmaking standpoint. But still, I thought it was a very well done movie. It was a little tough to really come up with notes and questions, particularly from the filmmaking aspect, because there just wasn't a whole lot there. They were pretty straightforward shots, not a whole lot of close-ups. So it was a little difficult as far as that goes for me trying to put this program together tonight. But still, when you have a really good film like this, I think it's just easy to talk about. I'm going to jump right into probably the most difficult question we'll have to talk about tonight. And that is, it roughly has to deal with like the first 20 minutes of the movie or so, with regard to the enhanced interrogation techniques that we saw in the film. We all know that these things really happened. There is quite a bit of controversy, or at least there was back in 2012 when the film was released, about basically this movie glorifying, or at least trying to put a positive spin on the waterboarding and all that stuff that we saw in the first 20 minutes of the film. What did you guys think about those enhanced interrogation technique scenes? Were they difficult to watch?
Well, I didn't think it was glorifying it in any way. I thought it was just, my impression was that it was a pretty realistic presentation of what those techniques were. And what you thought about it kind of depended on what your politics were on the whole thing. I mean, if you looked at it from, you could look at it from the point of view of go for it, or you could look at it and say, we really did that. But I thought overall, I thought they were important in terms of making the movie. But in the end, I thought that they were very realistically presented. I mean, I just kind of, shivered a few times watching what was happening. But I'm wondering why the guy just didn't die in the end.
Good question. Anybody else want to chime in on what they thought of the first 20 minutes of the film or so, and the sequences that we saw?
I don't think that it felt glorifying to me. It did feel a tad bit casual, I guess.
Hmm.
That just his behavior just coming out, the chattiness. It seemed a little casual for what was going on, but that's maybe just trying to get the characters across, their personalities across. So.
And I'm curious that you say it like that, Lisa. And my first immediate thought was, wow, is it did it maybe come off as casual because we're looking at this 10 years later and we already know that all this stuff was going on? Maybe if we were talking about this in early 2013, would it be a little more eye-opening for us, or maybe a little more intense, I guess? And I don't know if there's an answer for that. That was just my initial thought is, we already have all this space between us and the events. There was massive amounts of reporting on what was going on, especially at Abu Ghraib, and all the enhanced interrogation techniques that were being used. We've all heard about this since then. But I'm just curious if maybe if it was closer to the event, if it would seem a little more, like I said, intense. I don't know.
Well, I think what Lisa said dovetailed great off of what Chris said, because it like that made it all the more disturbing. Like the actions themselves were crazy enough, but then, because like thinking about your first question on here when he's like how Dan deals with the riggers, I was having a hard time, other than later in the movie when he had an ice cream cone and he was talking to the monkeys, but it was just like he's CIA and that's what he does and he doesn't care. So that's why it's like, he can just easily walk in and do that and it doesn't seem to disturb him at all. So, that's why I think I didn't think it glorified it either. And I thought it was, one of those things where it was like necessary to show the things that were happening to try to track him down, over the course of time.
Yeah,
I think there's an element too of that, not only that he didn't care, I think he did care, but he knows what he has to do to get the information that he needs. He does look very casual about it to the prisoner who he was interrogating, but I just feel he was of the mindset that this is what he needs to do to get the information that he needs. Oh.
Just doing his job.
Yeah, he did say he was getting burnout, after 7 years of doing it. I'm like, oh,
Right.
I
man.
get a little sick and tired of seeing, naked men all the time.
It only took.
Right.
But it's kind of like the opposite though. When we first meet Jessica Chastain and Jason Clarke at the same time, Dan and Maya, and like you said, Lisa, Dan was kind of maybe a little casual about it because he'd been doing it so long, like Brian said. But we see a clear difference with Maya, don't we? She is definitely a little disturbed when she first walks into that interrogation room. And I do ask, about Maya as well, if people would keep in mind to look at the transformation that she goes through from that first scene when she walks in there to later on in the movie. She's interrogating this guy on the ship, and she doesn't have a problem tapping the soldier on the shoulder so he can punch him in the face. She does it a couple different times. She seems quite comfortable with what she's doing now, but she wasn't quite comfortable in the beginning, was she?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's probably the difference between being a bureaucrat and being in the field.
Mm.
Well, I think that's too, because she had a conscience, but you figure out through the movie where she's like really driven, and if she feels, like when she's swearing at her boss and whatever else, but if she feels like she's not getting the information that she really needs, that she just sees that as another tool, I think from like an analytical, because they obviously pulled her from DC or wherever because of how smart and how great she was, and stuck her in the field, which ends up aging her through that movie. But I think she just sees like those techniques as just one more way to get information,
And I think her analytical look at this whole process was snapped, and she came to reality real quick when they tried to assassinate her.
Mm.
That woke her up and said, hey, this isn't a game. This is the job we do, and we got to get real about it. And she was probably real about it anyway, but that drove it home.
No, that's a good point. I mean, like I said earlier, we pretty much see her throughout the entire film, analyzing data. I don't want to disrespect the character or the real person that she was based off of, but there doesn't seem to be much of a field agent persona to her. But you're right. Once she has that attempted hit on her, you do see a change. You do see a turn. She was already kind of a tough as nails CIA agent to begin with, and you could see her getting a little tougher. But you're right, John. I think that moment really hardened her up and woke her up to the fact that this isn't all about sitting in an office behind a keyboard. There's more dire consequences than that. This movie did receive a lot of backlash for its interrogation scenes. Like I said earlier, a lot of critics, and more than critics, even some of the Academy Award, the people who review the films and nominate them and decide on who wins or what, they did not like this movie because of those enhanced interrogation scenes. They thought it was really promoting, or at least putting the torture in a positive light. And Catherine Bigelow and what's his name, Mark Bowl, the guy who wrote the screenplay, they received a lot of backlash for that. And there's a ton of articles on the internet, film reviews, and just articles that people who are filmy or film buffs like myself wrote, and they really slammed this film hard for those scenes. I thought it was a bit unfair myself. Like Brian said, it's part of the movie. It's part of the story that they're trying to tell. And it really would lose a lot of its luster and credibility, I think, if you took those scenes out and just didn't show them at all.
I kind of wonder if this goes back to some of the other things we've seen in some of the other movies we've watched. And that is, we're kind of looking in the mirror when we see that. Without those scenes, all we see are the newspaper articles. We never actually see videos of these techniques being carried out in real time. And so this is the first time we get a sense in video of what those techniques actually looked like. And I suspect that for a lot of people, that was very disturbing to realize we were doing that, and they didn't like the idea that we actually engaged in that kind of conduct, and therefore blamed her for bringing it to our attention rather than looking at it and saying, this is what we actually did.
That's a very good point. Yeah, what is that saying? What, I've met the enemy and he is us, or something like that?
Pogo.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And yeah, I mean, that kind of hits home just like that saying goes, Chris. That's a very good point. Lisa?
I think it does show what, actually, things that we know happen. I can see the side of people who are completely against any type of this behavior, and having it in the movie with the results that they're getting in the movie, by doing this, they get the information, then it kind of supports that necessity for it. So I can see where people who, does that make sense?
No, it does. And that brings up a good point, because that's another reason why there was a lot of backlash for those scenes. Not only were people saying that this, glorifies, what we were doing as far as torture goes, but they say that the movie was also very misleading because it did show us that these techniques resulted in information that we needed, when in fact, even the CIA director at the time the movie came out, and I'd have to go back and look up his name right now, it's not Leon Panetta, it was his predecessor. They said that those techniques did not yield the information that the movie portrays. Most times it yielded bogus information, or information that just didn't go anywhere. I really didn't see in the film them making a direct link between the torture and getting the right information. As a matter of fact, I saw it kind of opposite. I saw them as having problems with getting the right information through the torture. And in one instance, they were kind of lucky, and that's only because they lied to the detainee, Amar. But I just didn't see the film making that link like all these other critics saw. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something.
I may be misremembering the early part, the torture of Aman, but I don't recall that he actually gave them anything that led them anywhere.
No,
And
that's exactly right.
it was later on when actually there was they weren't torture, but there were some lesser but more but intense interrogations that actually yielded the information without going through the waterboarding and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So I didn't see it as glorifying torture as a way of actually getting useful information.
No, the only thing I would say is there were like all those scenes where Maya was looking at like video and stuff, video feed and computer stuff, where everybody's verifying like Abu Ahmed's name and picture. And I know at one point like it gets mixed up, but they did kind of try to show that like 8 different people knew who this guy was, you know, and that he was Bin Laden's courier. So for what
Yeah,
it's
they were
worth.
trying to pinpoint it between him and his like 13 brothers or something like that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, going off the names and then the nom de guerres and yeah, I can't even imagine being a CIA operative during this time. And I like Dan's line especially toward middle to 3/4 of the way through the film when he tells Maya, "Hey, look, you don't want to be the last one holding a dog collar when the press comes. So you better watch your back," just before he heads to Washington. And that I thought that kind of highlighted how wrong they knew it was, but still looking at it as a necessary evil, I guess. Moving forward to Maya, though, what did you think of that character and Jessica Chastain's portrayal?
I'll go again.
Sure.
I think that I found it interesting that she was pretty much solo. I mean, she did have Dan supporting her a little bit, but pretty much through the whole movie, she was solo. And I felt that, I don't know, I really don't see a lot of movies. So this is good for me to watch these and come here and talk. But to me, it seems like, it feels like, maybe I'm wrong, but in movies with men, there's seems to be always somebody that they have a support or feed off of. And it seemed like she was pretty much a loner. So not only kind of a woman trying to break through some of this stuff, but she was also doing it completely solo.
That's an interesting point, Lisa. And just to what you said when you first started, there's no wrong answers here. You know, everybody interprets everything in their own way, and you know, probably half the stuff I'm saying, you know, could be interpreted as a bunch of bull. So there's no wrong answers, Lisa. Never.
Well, with Lisa's point, that's kind of why I like those pictures that I've got behind my background there. She's by herself. She's standing alone, and things are going on around her, but there she is, contemplating and so on.
Yeah, I mean, like Lisa said, she had the support of Dan for a little while, you know, but he eventually went back to DC. The other female supporting actress in here, and her name is completely escaping me right now, the one who dies in the car bombing, she doesn't warm up to her at first. As a matter of fact, they seem a little standoffish toward each other for a while. They eventually become kind of tight. But yeah, I think you're right, Lisa. She really just doesn't have that support. And of course, you know, from a guy's point of view, I never thought of it as it's because, you know, maybe because she's a woman. But now that you mentioned that, that is a very interesting point. And even when she gets back to DC, she still doesn't have any support, even after she's writing, you know, day number 57, day number 83, day number 112. she's still not getting the support she needs. And it seems like maybe she doesn't get that until her first meeting with the CIA director, Leon Panetta, in which she, is blunt, she curses. And I think that's when maybe she starts to gain a little bit of respect and people start to take her seriously and maybe analyze her data a little differently.
And James Gandolfini shows up on as the CIA director. All I could think was, how appropriate to put Tony Soprano in charge of the CIA.
Well, he really does look like Leon Panetta, though. I was like, wow, they did a really good job of cutting his hair and suiting him up, and I was like, that's a pretty good Leon Panetta. We talked about the bureaucratic hero a little bit, but there's also a little bit about Maya that I want to talk about, and it kind of pertains to the larger picture of the whole movie. And she says at one point, she insists that a terrorist, what a terrorist will not say over the phone highlights its importance. What do you think that can tell us about the film itself? Like I said, this is a decade-long operation, and we're condensed down to 2.5 hours. So there's a lot that we don't see. Can you maybe put those two together and maybe talk a little bit about the things that we probably didn't see that makes some aspects of the film maybe more important because of that?
Well, when we talk about the non-support for Maya, in this, I don't know if it's true or not. I mean, obviously a guy wrote a book, but there's a Delta Force guy that wrote a book that talked about how they easily could have had Bin Laden and they weren't given the go ahead by Washington, earlier in the war. And I know that they there was always special ops dudes in the mountains hunting him. And I personally feel like we could have gotten him way earlier than when we eventually did. I think we eventually lost them because I don't Washington lost interest or something like that. But because I thought about that as I remember that book and watching Maya, I'm why doesn't this is Bin Laden, why does nobody want to seem to get Bin Laden at all? I thought that was the whole deal of us being over there. So that was just one thing that isn't shown, is that where they're actually, there's other things going on to find them, but Washington's dragging their feet on it.
I suspect.
Go ahead, Chris. I think one of the things that we didn't see in this time period was the absence of Bin Laden, the sightings, the communications. And I also think on the reverse side of that coin, that's one of the things that made Maya think he's not openly communicating. He has to have a courier. Somebody is taking messages in and out because he's not making himself available to talk or be seen. So I think we didn't see that in the years previous to this, that he went in a rat hole and stayed there. And her thinking was, he's got to have some kind of contact. Somebody's making connections to get his message out. So one of the things we missed, I think, was the whereabouts of, or sightings. There's always somebody is citing somebody. You can always find them. So that's what
I kind of wonder whether a lot of the gaps are related to the fact that attention was directed toward, maybe more about this, Eric, the war in Iraq. During this whole period, we had this long war, shooting war going on there in a way that it wasn't necessarily happening in Afghanistan. And to the extent it was happening in both places, Bin Laden sort of becomes an afterthought at that point. And the other gap was, and this was kind of interesting to me in terms of what's missing, is that Maya seems to realize that Bin Laden himself is never using electronic communication. He's always using couriers. And that keeps him kind of under the wire, out of the spotlight too, in the sense that all of our electronic monitoring doesn't pick up anything from him directly.
Yeah, just, little flashes here and there, but like you said, not from him, but from people that are known to be associated with him. And Brian mentioned, he alluded to Tora Bora, where, it was always presumed that he was hiding out in these, caves out in the wilderness of the mountains of Afghanistan. And this film actually was nearly, the screenplay was almost complete as a failed hunt in the Tora Bora region. And then news broke that, he had been killed in Abbottabad in Pakistan. And Mark Bowl, the screenwriter, he had to stop everything he was doing and completely rewrite the whole script to fit that narrative. He was just like everybody else. They were completely looking in the wrong place. Their attention was focused somewhere else. And when news came about where he really was and what really happened, he had to spend an extra 5 months rewriting the entire script so that we have the movie that we saw. He didn't get paid for it. He didn't want to get paid for it. He just wanted to tell the real story. I'd be interested to see, and there has been some talks about making that movie that was originally written. I'd be interested in seeing that.
I'm just curious, Eric, how much of Maya in the movie is really the person that tracked down Bin Laden?
From my understanding, she is a composite of a bunch of different CIA agents, both male and female, who, spent these 10 years, looking to find Bin Laden. They did base the character, like I said, it was a composite of a bunch of people, but they really looked at one CIA operative in particular. And they only mention her first name as Jennifer. But as far as, just like a Maya character who in real life had done all this, that's not really the case at all. It was a bunch of people, working on this, and they just kind of synthesized it into the Maya character. Although, from what I understand, they did a really good job. This CIA operative, Jennifer, that they identified, she was one of the lead operatives working on this for 10 years. She did a lot of work, probably the bulk of the footwork on it. But it wasn't just her as the movie portrays. It wasn't just the one person, doing all this. It was a team of people working together over this long period of time to identify and find and hunt down and kill this guy. There was also some articles that I read where they said that this movie wasn't accurate at all because they did have a plan to go in and just bomb the compound instead of sending in special forces operators to either capture him or kill him. And my first thought was, she said that when they're talking at Area 51 and she's talking to the special forces operators, and she's like, I really don't want you guys with your dip and your Velcro. I just wanted to drop a bomb. So they did, that was a plan. They really just did want to go in there and bomb the place. They didn't do that, obviously. And that kind of leads me up to my next question, and I may be jumping ahead of myself, but I'm also looking at the clock too. Why is it, do you think the director never showed us Osama bin Laden? No. I can tell you the actor who portrayed him, he didn't know that he was auditioning for the role of bin Laden. He knew he was auditioning for a role of a terrorist, but he didn't know it was bin Laden himself. And, we barely see this guy throughout the film. He might get 10 seconds of screen time, perhaps. Doesn't have a single line. But he spent 8 months learning Arabic. He read all kinds of books on Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and just to prepare for the role. So I bet you that must have been kind of I'm sure he was happy to get the role, but to put so much work into it, and to never have to say a word or even get to see his face, I'm sure that was a little disappointing. I will say that there was a film critic who wrote a great article, and I could send that along if anybody wants it, just let me know. And I do ask the question on, why do you think the director chose not to show Bin Laden at all? And he goes even further, and he says that she denies us a direct visual access to what we've been waiting the whole film to see. And as I was reading that, I was thinking, God, does that really set itself up for some lack of closure? We went through this whole film, 2.5 hours, although it didn't seem like 2.5 hours. It was, good. I thought the pace was really good. But we don't even meet Bin Laden until the very end. Like I said, we don't hear him, we don't see him. Was everybody expecting to at least hear him and see him at the end of the film?
That was a good question because I didn't even think about it. And I don't know, I can't remember when I very first saw the film, how I reacted, but I just think as like a military guy and living through all this, that like, I know what the guy looks like, like I could recognize him anywhere. So it like, I didn't even think about that through the whole movie. Like, where's Bin Laden? I was just like watching what was going on, focusing on the action and stuff like that. So that is weird. I have no idea, and I don't know if they wanted to do it to not like give him, I don't know, when you talked about your propaganda, and I don't know, this is just pure speculation, but just not to show him at all, to give him any sort of like that sort of respect or whatever based on what happened. I don't know, but that is a great question, and I never even thought about that the whole time.
I think I was a little disappointed. I guess I was expecting to see him. I mean, Maya got to see him. I mean, in the body bag, and she identified him. I guess I was. Not for some morbid reason or anything. It was just a culmination of a 2.5-hour movie. And yeah, I guess I did expect to see it. So a little disappointed with that.
How about you, Lisa?
Wasn't this like one of the first times they used some sort of immediate response DNA with?
Oh, you mean to identify him?
With Osama bin Laden? Yeah, wasn't it some newer technology, immediate response DNA? Because before you had to wait so much, and I don't know, maybe that had something to do with they just didn't show it at that time, because even though she did a visual, in real life you still wait for the scientific stuff to come back to verify it completely.
That's a good point. And my answer is I don't know, but I would suspect that there had to be some other form of identification besides this one, CIA agent saying, based off a picture initially, yeah, that's him. And then seeing him, once they brought the body back to the compound, getting a clear visual identification. I would suspect that there would have had to have been more than that, though. Our government just doesn't. They just don't react based off of, a visual identification for things like that. Not, at least not as far as I've seen. There has to be a lot more concrete evidence for them to finally come out and publicly say, that's him and we got him.
And I know it's kind of a movie thing, but Maya still seemed to have like this wide swath of roles. Like, even she was an investigator, but then like she was there talking to the special ops guys, and then she was there to identify the body, and then she was talking on the mics too with the helicopters and stuff. And I was like, wow, she she really gets a lot of roles, because you're trained in a specific area and usually stay in that lane, and she just seemed like she was all over the place.
That is a good point as well. That's not one that I had considered, but yeah, you're right. And I'm assuming you're right. I don't know any CIA operatives. I know a few CIA pilots, but I don't know anybody who's out there in the field, and I've never really looked at that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, just, and I'm sure Brian will back me up on this, just from a military standpoint, you know, if you're assigned a job, you're not doing all these other jobs as well. You're focused on what it is that you're doing. So no, that is a very good point, Lisa. Very good point.
She's a combination of a lot of people.
Yeah.
Or-
Well, and you know, that, and but she really is though. Like I said, this character was synthesized from, you know, I don't know how many people, but it wasn't just this one person doing all this. You know, she's the embodiment of all that. But I did find a lot of technical faults with this movie, and Lisa, you just brought up one more. Well done.
In terms of not seeing Bin Laden, I kind of thought at the end that the reason that we weren't shown it is because his body might have been so shot up that it would have been a kind of a shocking scene to say. So what they do is they show just enough to show his beard and so on that we're so familiar with, and that acts as our confirmation that was Bin Laden.
Yeah, I mean, from what, and that's a good point, Chris. From what I remember, and you know, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. My memory is not as great as it used to be. I believe at least one shot went to the face or the head area, something like that. So that, you're right, that would have been a very graphic, you know, depiction for sure. I still, you know, I still think there's a little lack of closure there. I wanted to see him at the end. That's what I waited the whole movie for. And quite honestly, you know, maybe it's a little bit of my morbidity coming out, but I've always wanted to see the actual photographs too. But you know, I don't suppose we'll ever see those unless, I don't know, maybe I get a high ranking government job someday, which will never happen. So.
Surprised they're not leaked online yet.
And you know, especially, you know, during this period, this is when technology is really starting to move forward. The internet's really starting to become a integral part of our lives. And you're right, Brian, everything else has been leaked. You know, we've seen things that we weren't supposed to see before. It's curious that never has been, you know, it's never come out. Who knows? Maybe it really wasn't him. Maybe he's still, you know, running around somewhere. I doubt it, but you never know. I do want to talk a little bit about.
Eric,
Yes.
I just scanned, you know, just briefly Googled Bin Laden DNA, and it said that his body was, just one thing that I saw, said that his body was identified 99.9% by DNA to be Osama Bin Laden. And several of the articles mentioned using a child or a sister or something like that to help confirm that.
Right, I was just going to say, I wonder where they got the initial DNA from to compare. But if they're, you know, using one of his children or a family member, I could see that happening. Especially a couple of his kids, if I'm not mistaken, they were not supportive of what their father was doing. And I know that I think his daughter, even recently, like within the past month or so, has been vocal about, you know, I'm a Bin Laden, but I'm not that Bin Laden. So yeah, very, very well could be that they did use a family member as their initial basis of DNA, and then they were able to confirm it that way. That's very interesting. Good Google search real quick, Lisa. Well done. Another thing that I kind of had a problem with this film, and it's my own personal thing, was the lack of character development. You know, we saw, I think the most character development we saw was through Maya. Dan was always the same, and I'm trying to base this off of, you know, the majority of screen time. I think Maya and Dan probably had the majority of the screen time. We didn't see much character development at all from Dan, and I'm still trying to figure out where he got the monkeys and what that was all about. But what did you guys think about the character or the lack of character development throughout the film? Were you okay with that? Did it detract from the movie at all, or did it not even make a difference?
I had trouble in terms of Maya because at one point she says, she's asked how she got into the whole job. She said she was recruited out of high school, or she joined out of high school, and she hadn't done anything other than that in the 12 years that she'd been with the agency. So I was wondering how she became this hotshot data analyst, just straight out of high school with not doing anything else, and suddenly she's the Bin Laden expert on this whole thing. So I had trouble with that, but it wasn't a great problem because the movie carries the plot so well.
I think the first thing I asked, I looked over at Karen and said, does that mean she didn't go to college?
Yeah, what, yeah.
And she said,
Well, I said, I think maybe she was recruited out of high school and then the CIA paid her college.
yeah, we're trying to
Yeah, we're
rationalize her
trying-
backstory.
Yeah, I just can't.
Chris,
imagine.
where's the Blu-ray when we need it?
Yeah.
It wasn't on the Blu-ray either.
Oh, no.
Yeah, Karen, I think you're right. If they recruited her out of high school, they probably did put her through college, determined her academic path, and her majors, I'm sure. I did have a small problem with it, but if anybody else wants to comment before I start rambling on again, please go ahead, Brian.
I agree with Chris that the story carried real well, but I just think if you try to develop characters and you're looking at like a 4-hour movie, so I think they just sacrificed development for trying to get as much of the story in, because like we've been saying, it's like a decade-long story tried to fit into a small 2.5 hours. So I just think there wasn't time.
I would agree with both of you, but I think I am right on point with Chris. When they started talking about her being recruited out of high school, for the next 15 minutes, I was kind of distracted from the film because I'm like, okay, well, how does the CIA recruit out of high school? How does that whole thing work? I mean, are you approached on graduation day by this CIA operative and, oh, come with me and we want to, how does that all work? And so for the next 15 minutes, I wasn't really focused on the film. I was focused on, those ridiculous thoughts in my head. So maybe, and to your point, Brian, you're right. It would have been, like a 4-hour film. My remark to the director would be, if you're not going to do character development, fine, don't do it. But don't throw little pieces at us that are going to distract from the film, especially with space cases like me who can't really stay focused for more than 10 minutes at a time. Because then, you're going to lose me for a little while and I'm not going to be really paying attention.
I just figured since it's a CIA, we're not allowed to know. So, so I'm just watching the story.
Anybody else want to chime in on that one? As far as, if you found the lack of character development a distraction, or if it didn't really even phase you at all. Lisa, go ahead.
On the character development, I agree with Brian that there's over a decade and so much. The characters that were brought into Maya, going back to her being solo, it was Dan, and then he kind of went away, and then each character that came into her being, into her space, like that other female character, and then the wavy-haired guy who did the I'm really bad with names in a movie. He was the one who was they were driving around looking for the Bings, that guy, then and the African American guy, and then the guy who knelt down by her when she was like distraught. I kept thinking, oh, this is going to be somebody who becomes a character with her, and then they just kind of disappear. They were just there for that moment in the movie, or come back a couple times, but they never developed.
Yeah, especially that African American guy, and we've seen him in a number of movies. But no, I kind of felt the same. They just kind of appear and then they disappear, and we saw him in a couple scenes, but there was really nothing there for him, and it was pretty much like that for a lot of the characters. They would just kind of show up for a few minutes, and then that was it. They served their purpose, and there's no need for them anymore. So here's your paycheck. Go look for your next movie. I also got into, like I said, there wasn't a great deal to look at from the filmmaking aspect, but I did ask a few questions out here. And in my first one, I'm really interested in this production designer, Jeremy Hindle. like I said in the discussion sheet, this is his first major motion picture. Prior to this, he primarily worked on commercials. How did this guy go from, you know, making a KFC commercial to working on a major motion picture like this? And I'll get everybody's, you know, initial thoughts first before I start jumping all over them. But what did you think of the production design value of the film?
I thought it was done quite well, especially the Abad. On the Blu-ray, they show how they actually constructed that from scratch, based on blueprints and so on that they had gotten, and consulting with, I guess, some of the SEAL team people that were there. And Mark Bowl says, in terms of the helicopters, for instance, that they had to piece together what the helicopters looked like, and he said he was told later on that even though all that stuff was supposed to be classified, that they had been pretty accurate in how they had portrayed that. When I saw the helicopters, and this is just an aside, there's a naval station near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Hard to believe that there's a naval station there. But they're on a lake, a very deep lake there, and they use it to test models of various submarines, including anti-detection designs and so on. And what struck me when I saw the helicopters was that they were very much, the angular design of them was very similar to the angular design of some warships and submarines that they were testing there at that naval station in Idaho.
Yeah, even very similar to what we're seeing right now as far as naval design that's actually not only being produced, but has been produced and is already out in the fleet. You know, like you said, the angles, certainly having to deal with radar deflection and any sort of you know, tracking devices and things like that. And yeah, I also read the same thing, that they were quite surprised how close they got to what those helicopters are really supposed to look like. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
I think we either saw or heard that the one helicopter that they blew up, the only thing that was left was the tail. And they kind of got part of the design, how did the detection angles were put on the tail. They had pictures of it, and that's how they helped build the rest of the helicopter, because they knew what the base was. It was I forget what the name of the helicopter was, the original type of helicopter, and then that was put on top of it. So anyway, I thought
they only had, like you said, John, they only had a few pictures to work off of.
right.
They did have a lot of governmental support. There's actually a lot of questions that were asked, and even still being asked, about how much information the CIA gave Mark Bowl, and was all the information they gave him proper? You know, did they go through the right channels? Did they maybe give away some classified information? And there's actually one instance where Mark Bowl was present at the ceremony that honored the guys who carried out this mission. And Leon Panetta was giving this speech during this ceremony, and he gave out some classified information during the speech, and Mark Bowl was not supposed to hear any of this, but he was in the audience, and so he did hear it. And there's been quite a few congressional inquiries about how much information the CIA gave out, and the information they did give out were they supposed to. I will just say, from the production designer standpoint, I think that maybe he needs a little bit more work as far as feature motion pictures go. And is pointed out in so many different articles that I read, but I saw it clearly when I was watching the movie. It's obvious they're not in Pakistan when you could see Indian flags flying all over the place. And when you could see insurance companies from India being advertised in the background. You know, a good production designer will have noticed all that stuff, and at the very least have covered it up and not allow it to be in the scenes. But it was just, it was kind of atrocious in my mind how little attention was paid to those minor details. Directional road signs that you see in the film are clearly, they clearly state that you're in India. And if you want to go to, these certain places in India, you take a left or a right, and it's okay. We're not going to go to Delhi if we're in Pakistan. So why do we see a sign that has directional indicators for Delhi? Go that way. I wasn't impressed from that aspect. Maybe it's just me being a little too nitpicky, I suppose. We are running out a little bit out of time. Before I get to my last question, which I always ask, like I said, there was some concern about improper access to declassified or classified information that was given to the producer or to the screenwriter and the director during the film. We did talk about the torture and how that was perceived and the blowback they got. Another thing that I didn't know, and I'm curious, Chris, if this was on the Blu-ray, at the very beginning of the film, we're hearing all of these voices from 9/11 itself, all these phone calls. And particularly we hear this stewardess on flight 93, if I'm not mistaken. All of those, the usage of all those voices was never authorized by the family members. It's kind of egregious that they were included in the film, but never cleared with the family members, never cleared with the 9/11 Commission. They just, took these recordings and used them kind of, I don't want to say illegally, but certainly maybe immorally. Chris, was any of that talked about in the Blu-ray?
Nothing on the Blu-ray about that.
Okay. Yeah, in particular, the stewardess, I think her last name was Ang, A-N-G, and her family, they said they didn't mind it being used, but they would like to see some proceeds go to, the 9/11 Recovery Foundation, and they would have liked some recognition from the producer and director and the screenwriter, particularly if they won an Oscar, which they did for best sound editing. And none of that ever transpired. And the family was actually not just their family, many families were kind of put off by the use of that. And when I read that, I thought that was a little, just a little upsetting that they would do that without getting at least permission from the families. So you go and see this movie and all of a sudden you're hearing your daughter's voice. I probably would have maybe walked out of the movie right there. I don't think I would have been able to stand to watch the rest of it. That would have been very hard, I think. Last question, my favorite question. Who was your favorite actor or character in the movie? And please tell me why. And we will start. I'm gonna maybe be a little mean and pick on somebody. Sally, I'm gonna start with you, because we haven't heard from you the whole hour. We still can't hear you. Muted, Sally.
I said I'm on my phone and I don't know how to work a Zoom meeting on my phone. Sorry. I would say Jessica Chastain. I think even though it was pitiful character development, at least she grew from the beginning of the film to the end. But what disturbs me is she had to act like a guy to be accepted, or what we stereotypical think of men acting in the military. So that's my little take.
And that's a great point. And Lisa's point earlier about her, not getting any support and wondering if maybe it was a male character, or in real life, if it was, a man in that position, right, what kind of support they would be getting. And, I hate to admit this, but as a guy, I like to hear those things, because that's not something that, I don't know, maybe I'm just different, but that's not something guys really think about, unfortunately. And so to get those female perspectives, it is eye-opening for me, but you're correct. You're absolutely correct. Both of you.
Thank you, Lisa, for all your comments. They've been wonderful all night.
It's good to see you, Sally. It's good to hear you.
Brian, how about you? Who's your favorite character and why?
I'd say also Maya, and like for the exact same reason as Sally, is that it was almost like Maya's adventure to kill Bin Laden is what the movie should have been named. I'm just kidding. No, but because they really it was you know, like Lisa said earlier, it was kind of like people coming and meeting her and leaving, and that's kind of how the whole movie was. And but it's funny because I don't, in general though, I really wouldn't have a favorite character for this movie, just because to me this was almost like the one question you had about docu-series or docudrama or whatever, because it's just an event that like sort of happened, and I felt they took some like Hollywood, you know, acting, but I like nobody really overacted either, you know, so it was just kind of like, it just seemed sort of like a documentary to me. So not that I didn't like it, but just for like really getting into a character, you know, that like who can act really well and sort of takes a movie. Like I just didn't see that happening here. So
Yeah, and the director and the screenwriter, they couldn't even, you know, put a term on what this movie is. You know, like you said, a docudrama. They couldn't classify it. At least back in 2014, the interviews that I was reading. So, Lisa, how about you?
I thought about that question from your discussion. I was like, oh, great. I'm not gonna be able to pick.
You know it's coming.
I think I'll go with the special ops team, because actually I know a few guys who work special ops, and they seem pretty realistic to me, a little on their kind of rough around the edges behavior and how they zoned in and went and did their job. And so I'm gonna pick the special ops team.
Yeah, and one of my favorite characters in the movie, very small role, was Chris Pratt. And I really liked it when he's talking about, hey, you know, when this is all over, I want to talk to you guys about this Tony Robbins stuff that I'm into. You know, I really want to get you guys into this. I was like, that really had to have happened, because how is a screenwriter just going to make up something like that and throw it in there? There's no way. That had to have been factual. They really probably had that conversation. Chris?
Well, I have to go with Maya. I mean, you don't have a movie without her, basically. And I thought that Chastain did quite a good job of, as she evolved throughout the movie. I just like the way she constantly fought for her position, regardless of who it was, right up to, you know, insulting the CIA chief and so on. Just no holds barred with her, and I think that helped make the movie.
Yeah, I think my favorite line from the whole film, well, aside from the Tony Robbins line, is when Leon Panetta asked, well, who are you? And I won't say what she said, but yeah, that was a great line. Yeah, exactly.
I'm the MF that found Bin Laden.
Found him.
hey, could I the other thing, Leon Panetta, CIA director, when they first show him that, I just laughed. The first thing he's like, is there a way we can get a camera in a tree or a bush? And I'm like, this guy's the director of the CIA? Like, I just thought that was one of the funniest lines. I didn't know if that was a joke or not.
No, I'm sure it was not a joke. I'm sure they wanted more positive identification than just the guest that they were working off of. John and Karen, how about you two? Who was your favorite character?
Well, I'll speak for her. We have a guest coming. They brought
Okay.
wine, so she's gone.
Wow. I don't blame her.
And I'm about to leave too. Maya, for both of us. And
All
it
right.
was because of the arc of her growing up through that time period, from the innocence at the first interrogation to the I'm running this, boys, and this is what I want you, the strike team, to do. So, and once again, I think Jessica Chastain did an excellent job on that character.
I mean, nominated for an Oscar, won a Screen Actor Guild Award for that character. So yeah, you guys aren't wrong about that. And you know, while I did really enjoy the character of Maya from Jessica Chastain, I'll take a little bit different tack, and I'll say Dan was my favorite character. He just something about his presence on the screen, his persona, and the way he went about conducting his business. It just really struck me, and I just really liked the way Jason Clarke portrayed that character. I thought that was really good. And then, like I said, Chris Pratt delivers one of my favorite lines in the film, so I will say him as well, although it was very small and just kind of in and out with that line. But still, I just am always, every time I watch this movie, I'm just struck by that line, and just, like I said, that really had to be in something that a conversation they really had, because there's just no way that you're just going to include that in a 2.5-hour movie just out of the blue. It struck me as strange. It really had to have happened, in my opinion.
Maybe it was product placement.
Maybe, who knows? All right, well, I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight. Once again, all of us cinemaphiles in here, just talking about what we really like, and that's movies. I can't wait to go over next month's movie with you. I have not prepared any notes or done any work on that at all. We have our cemetery tours coming up for the museum, starting in about a week, and so I've been super focused on that. Feel free to email me if you do not see discussion points come across rather soon. I will try to get those out next week, so that way I could put that behind me and focus completely on cemetery tours. And speaking of which, if anybody's in the Madison area and you've not signed up for our cemetery tours, you still have an opportunity to do that. We still have slots open for our candlelit tours, which go off on Saturday night, October 9th, and for our public tours on the afternoon of October 10th. So we'd love to see you come out. But if nothing else, we look forward to seeing you next movie night, which I think comes rather early in the month of October. But until then, I hope everybody has a great rest of the weekend, and we'll see you next month.